The Columbia Basin Development League has been a mainstay of the Northwest for 60 years at this point, but what is the CBDL all about, and how has it helped the farming community across Washington and beyond? I recently sat down with the CBDL's executive director, Sarah Higgins, to talk about the organization and how it got its start.
The Columbia Basin Development League is a nonprofit organization that started in 1964, basically a grassroots effort to support the continued development of the Columbia Basin Reclamation Project. So if we kind of go back in time a little bit and think about what was going on in the 60s, the Columbia Basin Project was in process, was being built out, and there was an acknowledgement by stakeholders that a concerted effort by stakeholder interests, by stakeholder groups, to ensure continued development of the project, to basically advocate for the project would be beneficial. And in that advocacy also including, an education and outreach component. And so the League was born of that need and has continued since to basically be the cheerleader, if you will, of continued advancement of the Columbia Basin Project.
Sarah, can you talk maybe to our non-farmers a little bit about what the Columbia Basin of Washington and even portions of Northern Oregon would look like if this project had not come to fruition? Because 1964, a lot of people were either little kids then or weren't even born at that time, so we might not appreciate what the basin looks like today and what it looked like back in the 50s and before.
Sure. So if anyone, ever drives through the project area, basically any area from Quincy to Grand Coulee Dam, kind of out to Ritzville, go south to Connell, and all the way down to Pasco. As you're driving in what is ultimately thousands upon thousands, hundreds of thousands of acres, you're driving through that area and you see some area that is brown, desert, sagebrush, and you see other area that is lush, green, tree fruits, row crops, and it generally doesn't hit us why that is even an issue. But the reality is that area is a desert area, and it is because of the Columbia Basin Project, a multi-purpose project that was originally authorized by Congress in the 30s and then again in the 40s to reclaim that desert land and to make it habitable and available for cultivation to produce the food that we have today from that area. So that distinction between what you see as sagebrush versus what you see as that green, lush area, the green area has been irrigated from water through a vast canal system that is ultimately water coming from the Columbia River. And it is a pretty substantial system that exists to provide for that irrigation and ultimately help us feed the state, the country, and the world.
When it comes to the Development League, the CBDL, 60 years is quite an accomplishment. How did the organization make it 6 decades?
Well, again, grassroots effort. I mean, this is an effort that was started by individuals who saw the potential in the development of the Columbia Basin Project and were passionate about it, that this was something that would impact their livelihoods and the work that they were trying to do, whether that was landowners, farmers that saw the great potential in being able to grow high-value irrigated crops, whether that was policymakers that saw the economic potential in developing the project, and also the quality of life that would produce in communities, that sort of self-sustaining opportunity. So individuals saw the potential and believed in it and, continued to advance it. It was volunteers that have largely made it happen through the decades, as well as visionaries at the local, state, and federal policy level.
Sarah, you talk about the economic impact of the project. Can you put in perspective what this project did for the state of Washington and the potential that it tapped and how it developed and molded the economy we know for the Evergreen State today?
Well, if we think about the economy of Washington State, agriculture is right up there at the top of economic impact. Washington State is significant in our agricultural contributions. The Columbia Basin Project itself has an annual economic impact of over $5 billion. And so we've got that piece for overall state, and even more broadly to the nation when you think about federal taxes, for example. But if you look at it in more of a microcosm at the local level, these communities that exist out in our central eastern Washington would not exist if it were not for the project, because again, we would be in a desert area. So we've had a number of communities that have grown and flourished throughout the years because of what the project made possible. But then you also think at a national level, and food security is a topic that is increasingly of interest to individuals, especially as we look to our friends in the Southwest, where climate change is causing some challenge with our ability to continue to grow food there the way we always have. Well, the Columbia Basin Project can be part of the solution in terms of ensuring continued food security for certainly for the nation, but also realistically for the world. Much of what is grown in the project area is exported, and there is certainly an economic benefit there when those exports go through our seaports. So there's a lot of value there, from the hard dollars to the economic system to quality of life, to food security. It all adds up.
Sarah, I don't know if you want to answer this personally or if you want to answer it from the perspective of the Development League, but what are some of the recent projects that you're most proud of, and what are some of the efforts you have planned for the near or not too near future?
Well, the primary purpose of the League is to advocate for the project. We are a small organization, and so we have to be rather wise about where we invest our resources. And a lot of that comes down to advocating at the state and federal level with our policymakers for funding to advance project efforts. And so from that standpoint, I think one of the just general areas of pride for the League is generating the awareness amongst our policymakers that has ultimately resulted in prioritization of efforts like the Odessa Groundwater Replacement Program, which is ultimately an aquifer rescue mission to bring surface water to those irrigators that are currently drawing from an aquifer that is declining. That is a pretty significant overall accomplishment. Certainly not one that the League has done by itself, but one that the League has fostered collaboration through and has been supportive in. Something I think maybe at a smaller level, very specific, is if we look at the various different aspects of the Odessa Groundwater Replacement Program. We've got to widen an irrigation canal. We've got to build out pump station and laterals to deliver project water to those deep well irrigators. When we think about that undertaking, there's several different components to that. One of them can be as simple as a bridge crossing over the canal. When you widen the canal, well, you've got to replace the bridge. Those bridges are county bridges. So now we've got to engage Grant County and Adams County in how we go about replacing those bridges. When those bridges are not in a state of disrepair, where can we possibly generate funding for economically disadvantaged counties such as Adams County? Well, when we put our nose to the grindstone and bring people together to come up with creative solutions, we're able to generate this last couple years nearly $10 million in funding to help address that issue. So, and that's a drop in the bucket in comparison to what the overarching successes have been throughout the years for the project overall, but also the Odessa Groundwater Replacement Program.
Sarah, before we let you go, typically it's about this time of year, maybe a little bit later, when the Development League has their day-long conference. When is that taking place, and what can we expect?
Well, so one of the things that the Columbia Basin Development League does annually is put together a day-long conference of information that keeps stakeholders informed of what the current efforts are on project maintenance, project development, what some of the policies are out there that are impacting the project. And so this year's conference takes place on October 29 in Moses Lake, and I would want to invite all of your listeners to join us and attend that conference. The League likes to say, if you live, work, or play in Washington State, the Columbia Basin Project impacts you. And we believe that there's a responsibility on the part of individuals residing in the state to be aware of basic things like where your food comes from and what makes that possible. And so I would invite and encourage everyone to join us at the conference and learn a little bit more about what's going on in the Columbia Basin Reclamation Project. Among some of the topics that we include, always there's an update from the irrigation districts within the project area. Each irrigation district, there's three, is responsible for delivering water to its landowners in a certain area of the project, and each irrigation district, has its own successes and challenges that it is working on, and so hearing an update of what's going on in each of the districts is important to stakeholders. So we always include that. Similarly, there's always an update from reclamation, what's going on at the local EFRADA field office. We are anticipating certainly an update on the Odessa Groundwater Replacement Program. We are anticipating hopefully some updates on some recent policy issues that don't directly influence the Columbia Basin Project, but certainly have an indirect impact and something that our stakeholders have interest in. And there's a number of those on the docket that aren't quite finalized yet. So I don't want to speak out of turn. But that's the general gist of the conference, is again to give that sort of broad perspective of what's going on, what impacts you, why it matters.
Once again, that was Sarah Higgins, Executive Director of the Columbia Basin Development League.